Her husband beat her in public until a cowboy growled. Not while I'm breathing. Maria woke up before sunrise, as she did every morning. The soft golden light of the early morning was just beginning to touch the edges of her small bedroom window, casting a calm glow across the room. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the hum of a distant car engine on the street outside. She sat on the edge of her bed, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to summon the courage to face another day. Her body ached from the previous night, and her heart felt heavy. Life in her town seemed ordinary to anyone who passed by. People smiled, waved at neighbors, and carried baskets from the market. The streets were lined with modest homes, their gardens full of blooming flowers and neatly trimmed grass. Children laughed and ran through the streets, chasing one another in a carefree way that Maria had not felt in a long time. But behind the closed doors of her own home, life was far from ordinary. It was a life filled with tension, fear, and uncertainty. Maria's husband, Daniel, was a man who had once seemed charming. When they first met, he was attentive, kind, and full of energy. He would surprise her with small gifts, take her to local fairs, and whisper words of love that made her heart flutter. But over the years, the charm faded. It was replaced by anger, criticism, and bursts of harsh words that sometimes escalated into physical confrontations. At first, Maria told herself that it was temporary, that every marriage had difficult times. But the pattern continued, and the abuse became part of the rhythm of her life. The mornings were often the hardest. Daniel would leave for work early, but not without a scolding, a sharp word, or a dismissive gesture. "Why is breakfast not ready?" he would ask, his voice heavy with irritation. Maria would quietly respond, hoping her soft voice would avoid setting him off. Some days she succeeded, moving like a shadow through the house, careful not to draw attention. Other days, no matter what she did, his anger would flare, and she would be left trembling. Maria dressed in muted colors that would not attract attention. She pulled her hair into a simple ponytail, kept her head low, and moved about her morning routine with mechanical precision. Outside, the world seemed bright and full of life, but inside her chest, there was a constant weight, a silent reminder that her life was not entirely her own. The bruises she hid under long sleeves and scarves were proof of nights she wished she could forget. Every mirror reflected her reality, and every glance reminded her that she had to be strong, even when her strength felt like it was disappearing. As she stepped outside to walk to the market, Maria tried to breathe in the fresh air. The sun was climbing slowly into the sky, painting the town with warm light. People greeted her as she passed, but she offered only small smiles. They had no idea what she carried inside, and she preferred it that way. It was safer for her to appear calm, to hide the turmoil beneath a surface of normalcy. The market was bustling with activity. Vendors called out the names of their fruits and vegetables, children tugged at their mothers' hands, and the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air. Maria moved among the crowd, careful not to draw attention. She picked up a few vegetables and bread, trying to focus on mundane details. The ripeness of a tomato, the softness of the bread, the way the sunlight glinted off a metal scale. She hoped that by immersing herself in these small tasks, she could ignore the fear that lingered in the pit of her stomach. But fear has a way of finding its way back. Maria had barely chosen her vegetables when she felt a familiar tension ripple through the crowd. A sudden, sharp voice called her name. It was Daniel. He stood a few feet away, his face flushed with anger, pointing at her with an accusing finger. "Maria, what do you think you're doing, buying vegetables like this? Don't you know how to manage money?" Her stomach tightened and her hands froze midair. People nearby began to glance in their direction, some whispering quietly, others staring openly. Maria wanted to shrink, to disappear into the crowd, but Daniel's eyes were fixed on her. He stepped closer, his voice rising, drawing even more attention. "You're useless. You can't even manage something as simple as buying groceries." Maria's face burned with shame, not just because of his words, but because of the attention she now received. She had hoped the market would be a place to buy her food quietly, without confrontation. She felt the eyes of the townspeople on her, judging, wondering, and she wanted nothing more than to escape. But there was nowhere to hide. Her mind raced, searching for the right words, the right way to calm him down. I just wanted to get the fresh tomatoes," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. But Daniel's anger was relentless. He continued berating her, his voice growing louder and sharper. Some people began to step back, unwilling to intervene. Others whispered to one another, unsure of what to do. Maria felt the world narrowing around her, the crowd fading, leaving only Daniel's rage pressing down on her. Memories of past confrontations flashed through her mind. The nights she had cried silently, the mornings she had woken with bruises, the moments she had wished someone, anyone, would stand up for her. But no one had, until now. A man's presence entered the scene, unnoticed at first. He was tall, with a strong frame and a quiet confidence that seemed to make the air around him shift. His eyes locked on Daniel, and there was a subtle but undeniable tension in the way he held himself. Maria did not know him, but something about him made her heart lift slightly, a small spark of hope in a moment of despair. Daniel noticed him too, and his anger flickered with a mix of surprise and irritation. The man stepped closer, not aggressively, but with the certainty of someone who would not be ignored. He did not speak immediately. Instead, his gaze was steady, unwavering, and filled with a calm intensity that unsettled Daniel. Maria watched, her breath caught in her throat as the man finally spoke. His voice was deep, firm, and commanding, yet controlled. "Not while I'm breathing," he said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of authority and protection. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Daniel's mouth opened and closed, unsure of how to respond. The crowd held its collective breath. Maria felt something she had not felt in years, a flicker of safety. Someone was finally standing up for her, someone who refused to let her suffer in silence any longer. Daniel's anger did not disappear, but it faltered. He stepped back, muttering under his breath, his control over the situation slipping. The crowd began to murmur, some in shock, some in relief, but no one stepped forward to confront the man. It was as if the mere presence of this stranger had shifted the balance of power. Maria's legs felt weak, and she sank slightly against a nearby stall for support. She could barely comprehend what had just happened. After so long of feeling invisible, of carrying the weight of her suffering alone, someone had finally intervened. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words would not come. She could only watch as he remained a protective figure, silent but unwavering, until Daniel finally walked away, muttering threats that he could not act upon in that moment. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Maria moved through the market mechanically, collecting the items she needed, still in shock from the encounter. But for the first time in years, she felt a tiny ember of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she did not have to face her fears alone. Maybe there was a way out of the life that had trapped her in fear and shame for so long. That evening, Maria returned home, her steps tentative. The house was quiet, but the familiar tension lingered. Daniel was not there yet, and she took a deep breath, letting the sunlight fading through the windows wash over her. She knew the confrontation at the market would not erase the past or stop future conflicts, but it had shown her that help could exist, that courage could take root, and that perhaps a different life was possible. Maria sat by the window, staring at the horizon where the sun was setting. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, a quiet promise that darkness does not last forever. She held onto that thought tightly. Tomorrow she would face the world again, but now with the knowledge that she was not entirely alone. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. The town had never seen a man like Luke before. He was quiet but not invisible. His broad shoulders, weathered hands, and calm presence set him apart from the usual townspeople who went about their routines without much thought. Luke had recently moved into the small house at the edge of the town, near the ranch that stretched behind the hills. Rumors quickly spread about him being a cowboy from another county, someone who knew how to handle both hard work and difficult situations. But no one really knew much about him, except that when he was around, there was a sense of quiet strength that filled the space. Luke had noticed Maria during his early days in town. He had seen her walking quickly to the market, head down, shoulders tense, carrying herself with a careful, almost invisible presence. Something about the way she moved, like she was constantly measuring the distance between herself and the world, caught his attention. He saw the subtle bruises peeking from beneath her sleeves, the nervous way she glanced over her shoulder when people approached, and the faint tremor in her hands. He did not know her name yet, but he understood that she carried a burden heavier than any basket of groceries. It was a warm afternoon when Luke finally witnessed the full extent of what Maria endured. The sun had reached its peak, and the streets were crowded with townspeople going about their daily routines. Vendors called out the prices of fruits and vegetables, children ran past with laughter, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air. Maria was at the market again, carefully picking out items for the evening meal. She moved deliberately, making sure she appeared calm and normal. But Luke could see the tension in her body, the way she flinched when a man brushed past her, and the subtle downward tilt of her head whenever someone spoke too loudly. Then he saw Daniel. Daniel emerged from the narrow street that led to the bakery, his expression dark and angry. He had already been drinking lightly, and the sight of Maria in public seemed to ignite a new surge of irritation in him. He pointed at her and shouted, "Maria, come here." "I said come here." His voice carried over the crowd, drawing attention and making some people stop to stare. Maria froze, her fingers still gripping a basket of vegetables. She tried to lower her gaze, hoping he would not notice her, but it was too late. Luke stepped forward instinctively, moving closer without hesitation. He could see the fear in Maria's eyes and the tension in Daniel's posture. Something inside Luke stirred, a need to protect, to intervene, to stop what was about to happen. He did not think about what Daniel might do to him. He only knew that he could not let Maria be hurt again in public, where the shame and humiliation would be amplified. Daniel advanced on Maria, his hand raised as if to strike her. The crowd held its breath. Some people stepped back, unsure of whether to intervene. Others whispered to one another, afraid to speak too loudly. But Luke stood his ground, his presence commanding attention without a word. His eyes locked on Daniel, steady and unflinching, and a quiet tension filled the space between them. Finally, Luke spoke. His voice was low, firm, and unmistakably certain. "Not while I'm breathing," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that stopped Daniel mid-step. The anger on Daniel's face flickered with confusion and disbelief. No one had ever spoken to him that way before, and certainly not in public. He glared at Luke, searching for weakness, but found none. Maria felt her heart lift slightly. She had been invisible for so long, overlooked and dismissed. Yet here was a man who refused to ignore her pain, who had stepped in without hesitation. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten existed, the feeling that someone could stand with her, not against her. Daniel muttered a few words under his breath, his pride wounded. He stepped back, his hand lowering slowly, his anger contained by the unexpected presence of the stranger. Luke did not move. He continued to watch Daniel with quiet intensity, ensuring that he would not attempt to continue the confrontation. Eventually, Daniel turned and left, muttering threats that no one dared to respond to. The market slowly returned to normal. Vendors resumed their calls, children continued to play, and the smell of bread drifted through the streets once more. Maria, still trembling, adjusted the strap of her basket and tried to regain her composure. She had been afraid moments ago, but now a sense of relief washed over her. Someone had protected her. Someone had seen her suffering and acted. Luke approached cautiously. He did not want to frighten Maria or draw unnecessary attention. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. His voice carried genuine concern, not judgment or curiosity. Maria nodded, though words failed her at first. She was not used to kindness in moments like these. People either ignored her or criticized her. The sudden presence of someone who cared without expectation left her momentarily speechless. I think so," Maria finally replied, her voice soft. She was still aware of the stares from the crowd, but found that she could tolerate them now that Daniel had left. "Thank you," she added, almost a whisper. Luke smiled faintly, a subtle gesture that felt comforting rather than intrusive. "It's okay," he said. "You shouldn't have to face that alone." His words, simple as they were, carried a weight Maria had not felt in years. They were a small promise that perhaps life could be different, that fear did not have to define her existence. Over the next few days, Luke became a quiet presence in Maria's life, though they did not speak often. He would see her at the market, nodding in acknowledgement, or help carry a heavy basket when she struggled. It was not grand gestures or dramatic heroics. It was the small, consistent presence of someone who cared, someone reliable. Maria began to notice the subtle changes within herself. She walked a little taller, her hands no longer trembled as much, and her mind began to entertain thoughts she had thought impossible, thoughts of safety, freedom, and a life beyond fear. Maria also noticed that Daniel seemed wary after the public incident. He avoided confrontation in public for a time, though his anger at home remained. But even at home, Maria felt a new strength. She remembered Luke's words, his firm yet calm insistence that she did not have to suffer alone. She began to see that her fear, while understandable, was not insurmountable. She could face her situation with support, planning, and careful steps. One afternoon, Luke invited Maria to sit on a bench outside the small cafe near the town square. The sun was warm, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees. He offered her a cup of tea, which she accepted hesitantly. They sat in silence at first, listening to the sounds of the town, the laughter of children, the clatter of dishes from the cafe, the soft murmur of conversation. "You don't have to stay silent," Luke said after a while. "I know it's hard. I know it feels like no one sees you, but you deserve to be safe. You deserve to be heard." His words were not just advice. They were a gentle push toward empowerment, a reminder that Maria's life could be her own again. Maria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had been silent for so long, trapped in fear and shame, that the very notion of speaking openly felt foreign and frightening. But Luke's presence made it feel possible, even natural. She nodded slowly, letting herself absorb the reassurance. I don't know if I can," she admitted. "I've been so used to hiding, to pretending everything is okay." "That's okay," Luke replied gently. "It's not about doing everything at once, it's about the first step, however small. Even standing here talking to me is a step forward." His words carried patience, understanding, and a quiet insistence that change was possible, one moment at a time. In the days that followed, Maria began to notice subtle changes in herself. She started walking with her head held a little higher, avoiding Daniel's critical gaze more confidently, and finding small ways to assert herself. She still faced fear, uncertainty, and the lingering tension of past abuse, but she began to realize that support existed outside her immediate household. Luke was not just a stranger. He was a symbol of the courage, strength, and compassion that could enter her life when she least expected it. The town itself began to notice a change too. The whispers and glances that once followed Maria began to fade, replaced with cautious smiles and quiet acknowledgement. People saw that she was no longer entirely isolated, that someone stood by her, even if they did not fully understand the details. This small shift gave her courage, reinforcing the idea that she did not have to face her life alone. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Maria found herself standing outside her home, watching the horizon. The warmth of the fading sunlight touched her face, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she was free from fear, a future where her life was her own. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, that obstacles still lay ahead, and that Daniel's presence remained a threat. But the memory of Luke's calm, unwavering support reminded her that even in darkness, light could enter. Maria understood that the next steps were hers to take. She could no longer remain invisible, trapped by fear. She could reach for help, plan for safety, and take small actions that would gradually lead her toward freedom. And she knew that, no matter what happened, she had someone who believed in her strength, someone who had already proven that courage could change everything. Days turned into weeks, and Maria began to notice subtle changes in herself. The fear that had once defined her mornings and evenings was no longer the constant, crushing weight it had been. Luke's quiet presence, though not intrusive, reminded her that she did not have to face her life alone. He was not a hero rushing to fix everything. He was a steady force that reminded her of her own strength. It was a new feeling for Maria, a sense of control over at least some part of her life, and it gave her hope. At home, things remained tense. Daniel still carried his anger, though he had become more cautious in public after the incident at the market. He did not yell as openly or strike as violently when neighbors could see, but behind closed doors, the environment was still heavy with intimidation. Maria had learned to navigate it carefully. She planned her movements, avoided confrontation, and kept her bruises hidden under long sleeves and scarves. Yet with Luke's support in mind, she began to consider her options more seriously. One afternoon, Luke approached Maria as she left the local grocery store. He held 2 cups of tea and smiled gently. "Thought you might like a break," he said, offering her one. Maria accepted it with a small nod. They walked slowly down a quiet side street, away from the crowded market, and sat on a low stone wall shaded by an old oak tree. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" Luke asked softly, careful not to pressure her. His question was not about forcing decisions, it was about helping her recognize her own voice. Maria took a deep breath, staring at the ground. I don't know," she admitted. "It's so hard. I've been living like this for so long that I don't even remember what freedom feels like." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the weight of years spent in fear. "That's understandable," Luke said. "You've been conditioned to stay silent and small. But just because it's hard doesn't mean it's impossible. Small steps, careful planning, and support can get you there." Maria looked at him, searching his face for judgment, but found none. Just patience, understanding, and a calm insistence that she deserved better. That simple affirmation began to sink in, planting a seed she had almost forgotten existed, the belief that she could take control of her life. Over the following weeks, Maria began to take small but significant actions. She started keeping a private journal, documenting Daniel's behavior, including the times he had threatened or hurt her. She carefully noted the dates, the incidents, and any witnesses, knowing that this information could be crucial if she decided to seek help. Writing it down made her feel like she was reclaiming her narrative, putting her experiences into words rather than letting them remain hidden in fear. Luke supported her quietly. He offered guidance about resources in the town, letting her know about local counseling services, support groups, and legal aid that could provide protection. He never pushed her to act before she was ready. He only provided information and encouragement. Maria appreciated this more than she could say. For years, every suggestion from someone had felt like pressure, another way for people to judge her for her circumstances. Luke's approach was different. It was empowering rather than demanding. Maria also began to reach out to a few trusted friends in town. She had kept her struggles private, ashamed of the bruises and the fear that had dominated her life. But with each conversation, she felt a small weight lift. Friends offered quiet support, listening without judgment, and some shared stories of people they knew who had faced similar situations. The knowledge that she was not alone, that others had navigated similar struggles, made her feel stronger. Despite these steps forward, challenges remained. Daniel's presence was still a source of fear, and he had moments of intimidation that reminded her of the danger she faced. One evening, he returned home earlier than expected, his mood dark and unpredictable. Maria's heart raced as he approached, his voice sharp and accusing. "Where have you been?" he demanded. Maria stayed calm, focusing on her breathing. She had rehearsed her responses in her mind, finding ways to assert herself without escalating the situation. "I was at the market," she replied, her voice steady, though her hands shook slightly. Daniel's eyes narrowed, but he did not strike. Instead, he muttered under his breath and left the room, leaving Maria shaken but relieved. She realized that she had survived another confrontation without physical harm, and that small victory strengthened her resolve. Each instance where she maintained composure and did not allow fear to control her response was another step toward freedom. One afternoon, Luke invited Maria to walk with him along a quiet trail near the edge of town. The sun was warm and the soft breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. They walked slowly, side by side, speaking in low, comfortable tones. "You're stronger than you think," Luke said. "You've been through so much and yet you're still here, still moving forward. That takes courage." Maria looked down at her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I feel scared all the time," she admitted, "but I also feel like I can't go back to being the person I was. I don't want to live in fear anymore." "That's good," Luke said. "Fear is natural, but it doesn't have to control you. You can use it to guide you, not trap you. You're taking steps, slow, careful steps, but they're real and they're leading you to freedom." In the weeks that followed, Maria began putting a safety plan into place. She identified safe places she could go if Daniel became violent, memorized emergency numbers, and discreetly packed a small bag with essentials, just in case she needed to leave quickly. She began to speak more openly with friends, letting them know about her situation and arranging support if she needed it. Every step was small, almost invisible, but together they built momentum. Maria began to feel that she was reclaiming her life piece by piece. She was no longer entirely defined by fear, no longer trapped in silence. The journal she kept documented not just the abuse but also her progress, her thoughts, and her victories, however small they seemed. Maria also began to practice self-care in ways she had long neglected. She walked through the town with her head held higher, allowed herself to enjoy a warm cup of tea at the cafe, and even laughed softly when something amused her. These small moments of joy, once nearly impossible, became markers of her growing independence and resilience. One evening, Maria confided in Luke about her fears of leaving Daniel. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't manage? What if he comes after me? What if everything falls apart?" Luke listened patiently. "Those fears are real and it's normal to feel them," he said. "But you're not alone. You've been preparing, you've been building support, and you've been reclaiming your strength. You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to take one step at a time." "Each step is a victory," Maria nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into her chest. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it, and she had been moving forward steadily for weeks now. As the days passed, Maria's confidence grew. She began speaking more assertively at home, setting boundaries and documenting incidents with clear intent. She practiced what she would say to authorities or friends if she needed help. Each action, no matter how small, reinforced the sense that her life could belong to her again. Even Daniel began to notice the change. He could sense the subtle shift in her demeanor, her newfound quiet strength, and the invisible shield of support she now carried. He could no longer intimidate her as easily, and that frustrated him. Maria, however, felt a deep sense of empowerment she had never experienced before. One afternoon, Maria sat by the window, looking at the sun setting behind the hills. The sky was painted with orange and pink hues, the same way it had been on the day Luke first intervened. She thought of the journey she had begun, of the steps she had taken to reclaim her life, and of the courage she had discovered within herself. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that freedom was possible, that fear did not have to define her, and that a future without constant pain and intimidation could exist. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. Challenges remained, and Daniel was still a presence in her life that could not be ignored. But Maria also knew that she had the tools, the support, and the inner strength to face whatever came next. She was no longer the same woman who had walked through the market trembling with fear. She had grown stronger, bolder, and more determined to take control of her destiny. The journey was far from over, but Maria could see the path ahead, lit by small victories, the support of allies, and her own growing courage. Each day brought her closer to a life where she could live freely, confidently, and without fear. And with Luke's quiet guidance, she knew that she would not have to face it alone. The morning sun filtered gently through the curtains, casting a soft glow across Maria's room. She woke feeling a strange mix of nervousness and determination. Today was different. She had spent weeks quietly preparing, planning each step carefully, and now it was time to put her plan into action. The weight she had carried for years, the fear, the uncertainty, and the shame, was still there, but it no longer controlled her. Maria had decided that she would not wait for change to happen to her. She would take it into her own hands. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were comfortable but would not draw unnecessary attention. Every small decision felt important, a reminder that her life was finally becoming hers to shape. She glanced at the small bag she had packed with essentials, important documents, money she had saved, and a few personal items. It was a symbol of her new agency, a quiet assertion that she had the right to protect herself. Luke had promised to be there for her, but he respected her independence. He arrived just as Maria was stepping out of the door, giving her a reassuring nod. "You're ready," he said simply. His presence was calm but grounding, a steady reminder that she was not alone. Maria nodded, swallowing the nervous lump in her throat. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm ready." The first step was to seek legal protection. Maria had already spoken to a local counselor who connected her with authorities and legal resources. She walked into the small office with determination, clutching her documents. The process was formal and sometimes slow, but she felt empowered by taking control. The officers and counselors treated her with respect and care, acknowledging the courage it took for her to come forward. As the paperwork was processed, Maria felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She knew Daniel would be angry if he discovered what she had done, but she also understood that she was taking necessary steps to secure her safety. She had rehearsed these moments in her mind, preparing herself to stay calm and assertive. With each interaction, her confidence grew. She was no longer the same woman who had trembled in the market weeks ago. Leaving the office, Maria felt a surge of empowerment. The sun was bright in the sky, and she breathed deeply, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. She walked with her head held high, feeling a sense of freedom that had been unimaginable not long ago. Luke met her outside, offering a quiet smile. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free," Maria replied softly, though the word felt almost foreign on her tongue. "I'm finally taking my life back." She paused, reflecting on how far she had come. The fear and uncertainty were still present, but they no longer defined her every move. She had tools, support, and a plan, and most importantly, she had reclaimed her own voice. Over the next few days, Maria began to build a new routine, one that centered on safety, healing, and self-care. She moved into a temporary safe place provided by the authorities, a small apartment with simple furniture and bright windows. It was modest, but it was hers. Every item she unpacked, every corner she arranged, felt like an act of reclaiming her life. She allowed herself to smile, to breathe without the constant weight of fear pressing on her chest. Therapy became a regular part of her life. At first, speaking about the abuse was incredibly difficult. Memories of harsh words, threats, and physical pain brought tears that she could not hold back. But with each session, she felt lighter, unburdened by the secrecy and shame that had trapped her for years. She learned strategies to cope with fear and anxiety and began to rebuild her sense of self-worth. Slowly, Maria began to recognize that she deserved happiness and respect, that her life could be more than survival. Luke remained a supportive presence throughout this process, but always in a way that respected Maria's autonomy. He offered practical help when needed, accompanied her to important meetings, and provided quiet encouragement without ever overshadowing her. In his presence, Maria felt safe, but she also felt capable of standing on her own. Their bond was built on trust, respect, and shared understanding, a reminder that strength often comes from quiet, steady support rather than dramatic heroics. One afternoon, Maria walked through the town square, observing the familiar sights that had once seemed suffocating. Children played in the same streets she had once avoided, and vendors called out to their customers as usual. She paused near the cafe, taking in the sounds and smells, and realized how different everything felt. The streets no longer seemed threatening. They felt like a part of her life that she could enjoy rather than fear. She allowed herself a small smile, savoring the sensation of walking without trembling, without hiding. Maria also began reaching out to the community, sharing her story in careful, measured ways. She wanted others to know that abuse was not something to be endured in silence. She spoke with local women's groups, counselors, and even casual acquaintances, offering encouragement and advice based on her own experiences. She realized that her story could be a source of hope for others trapped in fear, a reminder that change was possible with courage, support, and planning. Meanwhile, Daniel faced consequences for his actions. The authorities took her complaints seriously, and he was required to attend counseling and abide by legal restrictions to prevent further harm. Maria did not focus on revenge or anger. Her attention was on her own healing and the life she was building. She understood that the past could not be erased, but she could shape her future. Each day, Maria discovered new ways to reclaim her life. She cooked meals without fear of criticism, allowed herself to read and write for pleasure, and even began small social activities that she had once avoided. She reconnected with old friends, repaired strained relationships, and found joy in moments she had once thought impossible. Slowly, she felt like herself again, not the version of herself defined by fear, but the version capable of strength, resilience, and happiness. Luke continued to be a quiet support, a presence she could rely on when needed. They spent time together discussing plans, enjoying walks, and sharing laughter. But Luke never overshadowed her independence. He never made her feel that she owed her freedom to him. Instead, he reminded her that the courage to change her life had always been inside her. It was his role to help her recognize it. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Maria stood by her apartment window. She reflected on her journey, from the days of hiding bruises and walking in fear to standing tall in the market, speaking up, and taking steps toward freedom. The sky outside mirrored the change within her, bright, open, and full of possibilities. She realized that while the journey had been difficult, each challenge had strengthened her, Each small victory had built momentum, and each act of courage had brought her closer to the life she now embraced. Maria allowed herself to dream of the future. She imagined traveling, learning new skills, helping others in similar situations, and building relationships based on respect and trust. She knew that freedom was not a single moment, but a series of choices made every day. And she was committed to making those choices, confident in her ability to protect herself, stand her ground, and live fully. The story of her survival and growth became a quiet inspiration to those around her. People in the town saw her strength, her courage, and the grace with which she reclaimed her life. Friends and neighbors admired her ability to overcome fear, not with anger or aggression, but with determination, patience, and careful planning. Maria became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, it is possible to find support, build courage, and create a life free from fear. On a crisp morning a few months later, Maria and Luke walked together along the path near the edge of town. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and the sun illuminated the hills in golden light. They walked side by side, comfortable in silence, knowing that the past had been difficult but also knowing that the future was theirs to shape. "I can't thank you enough," Maria said softly, turning to him. "You didn't force me, you didn't push me, but your support, it made everything possible." Luke shook his head gently. "You did this," he said. "I only reminded you of the strength you already had. You took the steps, you faced the fear, and you reclaimed your life. That was always yours to claim." Maria smiled, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. The fear that had once consumed her no longer dictated her choices. She had reclaimed her life, her voice, and her dignity. Each step she had taken, guided by courage and quiet support, had brought her to this moment, free, empowered, and ready to embrace the life she had long deserved. As they continued walking, the town stretched out before them, full of ordinary sights and familiar sounds. Yet for Maria, everything had changed. The streets were no longer places of fear, but spaces of possibility. The market, once a site of humiliation, had become a symbol of her courage. And the future, once uncertain and shadowed, now glimmered with hope, resilience, and freedom. Maria knew that challenges might still arise, but she was ready. She had discovered the power of her own strength, the importance of support, and the possibility of a life filled with peace, respect, and joy. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in colors of promise, she stepped forward into her new life with confidence, courage, and hope, truly free at last.